The heavy oak doors of Montgomery County Family Court creaked open at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning in November. A hush fell over Courtroom 3B as all eyes turned toward the entrance. What they saw made even the most hardened legal professionals pause. A tiny 7-year-old girl with tangled auburn hair and a faded purple dress, walking slowly alongside the most beautiful golden retriever anyone in that courthouse had ever seen. Emma Rose Mitchell was so small she could barely see over the defendant's table. Her pale blue eyes, rimmed with dark circles that no child should have, darted nervously around the room, taking in the towering wood-paneled walls, the imposing judge's bench that loomed like a mountain before her, and the dozen or so adults who would decide her fate. Her right hand clutched a worn stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. One ear was nearly torn off, held on by a few threads. Her left hand gripped the leather harness of Bailey, a 3-year-old golden retriever whose calm, steady presence seemed to be the only thing keeping the little girl from completely falling apart. The court clerk, Mrs. Patterson, a grandmother of 5 who had seen countless difficult cases in her 30 years of service, felt her eyes misting over. She'd read the case file. She knew what this child had been through. She watched as Emma's small legs, stick-thin beneath her dress, moved forward one hesitant step at a time, and she had to look away. "All rise," Mrs. Patterson announced, her voice catching slightly. "The Honorable Judge Margaret Westbrook presiding." Everyone stood as Judge Westbrook entered through the side door. She was a striking woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. In her 20 years on the family court bench, Margaret Westbrook had developed a reputation: tough but fair, impossible to fool, and fiercely protective of children. She had presided over hundreds of custody cases, had seen parents at their worst and their best, and had made decisions that changed lives forever. But as she settled into her chair and looked down at the small girl with the golden dog, something in her experienced heart clenched. "Please be seated," Judge Westbrook said softly, her usual commanding tone gentled. "Case number 2024 FC 8847, Mitchell versus Mitchell, custody determination. Counselors, are we ready to proceed?" The attorneys on both sides stood and affirmed they were ready. On the left side of the courtroom sat Jennifer Mitchell, Emma's mother, a thin woman in her early 30s with the same auburn hair as her daughter, though hers was streaked with premature gray. Her hands trembled as she twisted a tissue in her lap. Her attorney, Maria Rodriguez, was a seasoned family law specialist known for taking on difficult domestic cases. On the right side sat Robert Mitchell, Emma's father. In stark contrast to his ex-wife, Robert looked polished and confident in an expensive navy suit, crisp white shirt, and burgundy tie. He was handsome in a calculated way, strong jawline, perfectly styled dark hair with just the right amount of gray at the temples, and a smile that could charm anyone who didn't look too closely at his eyes. His attorney, David Blackwell, was equally polished, representing one of the most prestigious law firms in Pennsylvania. Between them, at a small table positioned slightly forward, sat Emma and Bailey. The golden retriever had positioned himself perfectly beside Emma's chair, his warm body pressed against her legs. He sat with remarkable stillness, his dark amber eyes watchful and alert, but his presence radiated calm. He wore a blue vest that read "Service Dog" in bold white letters, along with smaller text that said, "Do not pet working." Judge Westbrook leaned forward slightly, studying the child before her. Emma's small frame was rigid with tension, her shoulders hunched up near her ears as if trying to make herself as small as possible. The little girl's gaze was fixed firmly on the table in front of her, refusing to look up at anyone. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. The judge could see the quick rise and fall of the child's chest even from her elevated position. "Emma," Judge Westbrook said gently, her voice warm and reassuring, "my name is Judge Westbrook. You can call me Judge Margaret if that's easier. I know this is scary, but everyone here just wants to make sure you're safe and happy. Do you understand?" No response. Emma didn't look up, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge the question in any way. Her only movement was the slight tightening of her grip on the stuffed rabbit, which she now held pressed against her chest like a shield. The judge tried again. "Emma, sweetheart, can you look at me, just for a moment?" Still nothing. But Judge Westbrook noticed something interesting. Emma's free hand had moved from her lap to rest on Bailey's head. The moment her small fingers made contact with the dog's soft golden fur, some of the tension seemed to leave her shoulders. Bailey, for his part, remained perfectly still except for the gentle thumping of his tail against the floor. Whispers began to circulate through the gallery. Social workers, court-appointed child advocates, and a few journalists who had gotten wind that this might be an unusual case. The whispers grew louder, creating a low buzz of speculation and commentary. "Silence in my courtroom," Judge Westbrook said firmly, her authoritative voice returning. The whispers died immediately. She returned her attention to the child, concern etched across her features. In all her years on the bench, Judge Westbrook had worked with traumatized children before. She'd seen kids who'd been abused, neglected, caught in the crossfire of bitter divorces. But there was something about Emma's silence that felt different, deeper, more profound. This wasn't a child being stubborn or shy. This was a child who had been so thoroughly broken by whatever she'd experienced that she'd retreated somewhere inside herself where no one could reach her. Almost no one. Judge Westbrook noticed that despite Emma's complete lack of response to humans, she remained connected to the dog. The child's hand never left Bailey's head, her fingers moving gently through his fur in a repetitive, soothing motion. And the dog, remarkably, seemed attuned to every tiny shift in Emma's emotional state. When Emma's breathing became more rapid, Bailey shifted his position slightly, pressing more firmly against her legs. When her hand gripped his fur tighter, the dog's tail stopped wagging and he became even more still and grounded, as if providing her with a solid anchor in a storm of fear. "Your Honor," Maria Rodriguez, Jennifer's attorney, stood up. "If I may address the court regarding Emma's condition and the presence of her service animal." "Please proceed, Counselor," Judge Westbrook said, settling back in her chair. She had a feeling this was going to be unlike any case she'd ever handled before. The stage was set. The players were in position. And at the center of it all sat a little girl who hadn't spoken in 6 months, whose silence held secrets that would soon shake this courtroom to its very foundation. The only question was, how would the truth finally come out? Bailey shifted slightly, his intelligent eyes scanning the room. He could sense what the humans could not yet see, the tension, the fear, the danger that lurked in this room, and he would be ready, because protecting Emma was not just his job, it was his purpose, his entire reason for being. The custody hearing had begun. Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her glasses nervously as she took the witness stand. As Emma's therapist for the past 4 months, she carried a thick manila folder containing reports, observations, and documented progress notes that told a story of unimaginable trauma and miraculous healing. The courtroom's attention shifted to her, and she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. What she said in the next few minutes could change Emma's life forever. "Dr. Chen," Maria Rodriguez began, standing near the witness box with a gentle but purposeful demeanor, "can you please tell the court about your professional background and how you came to work with Emma Mitchell?" Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "I'm a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in childhood trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. I've worked with traumatized children for 15 years, many of them victims of domestic violence." Her voice was steady and professional, but her eyes kept drifting to Emma, who still sat motionless at her table, hand buried in Bailey's golden fur. "I was referred to Emma's case in July of this year by Child Protective Services. When I first met her, she was one of the most severely traumatized children I'd ever encountered." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Even Robert Mitchell, who had been leaning back casually in his chair, sat up slightly straighter. Can you describe Emma's condition when you first began treating her? Maria asked. Dr. Chen took a deep breath, and her professional composure cracked slightly. Emma was exhibiting severe symptoms of PTSD. She wouldn't speak, not a single word. She wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. She experienced multiple panic attacks daily, sometimes lasting over an hour. She had night terrors so severe that her mother had to sleep on the floor beside her bed because Emma would wake up screaming but wouldn't let anyone touch her. The doctor's voice thickened with emotion. She'd lost 12 pounds in the month before I met her because she was barely eating. She would vomit if anyone raised their voice anywhere near her. She couldn't attend school. She couldn't function. This little girl she was disappearing. Jennifer Mitchell let out a soft sob from her seat, burying her face in her hands. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Judge Westbrook's expression remained neutral, but her fingers gripped her pen more tightly. "And what was your treatment approach?" Maria continued. "I tried everything," Dr. Chen said, shaking her head. "Traditional play therapy, art therapy, cognitive behavioral approaches adapted for children. Emma would sit in my office for 50-minute sessions and wouldn't engage at all. She'd just sit there, frozen, staring at nothing. It was like trying to reach someone who was drowning but couldn't or wouldn't grab the life preserver you were throwing them." She paused, pulling out a tissue to dab at her eyes. "I was running out of options. And then I learned about Bailey." At the sound of his name, the golden retriever's ears perked up slightly, though he remained in position beside Emma. It was such a small, natural response, but it made several people in the courtroom smile despite the heavy atmosphere. "Tell us about Bailey," Maria encouraged. Dr. Chen's entire demeanor changed. Her eyes lit up and she leaned forward eagerly. "Bailey is a psychiatric service dog trained by Positive Hope, a specialized organization that pairs rescue dogs with traumatized children. He went through 2 years of intensive training, longer than most service dogs because of the specialized nature of his work. Bailey was trained to detect anxiety, panic attacks, dissociative episodes, and signs of emotional distress. But more than that, he was trained to respond to them." "How does he respond?" Judge Westbrook interjected, her curiosity clearly piqued. Dr. Chen turned to address the judge directly. "Your Honor, Bailey uses something called deep pressure therapy. When he senses Emma's anxiety rising, he'll press his body weight against her legs or torso. It's a grounding technique that helps bring someone back from a panic attack. He's also trained in what we call blocking behavior, positioning himself between Emma and sources of stress to create a physical barrier that helps her feel safe. And perhaps most remarkably, he's been trained to wake Emma from nightmares and stay with her until her heart rate returns to normal." The judge looked down at Bailey with newfound respect. The dog sat with perfect posture, professional and alert, but there was something in his deep amber eyes, an intelligence, an awareness, that was remarkable to witness. "But that's just his formal training," Dr. Chen continued, her voice rising with excitement. "What's happened between Bailey and Emma goes far beyond his training. Your Honor, in my 15 years of practice, I've never seen anything like their bond. Emma has created an entire communication system with Bailey, a language that only the two of them fully understand." "Objection." David Blackwell, Robert's attorney, stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this testimony is becoming speculative and unscientific. A language between a child and a dog. This is absurd." "I'll allow it," Judge Westbrook said firmly. "Dr. Chen is a qualified expert and I want to hear what she has to say. Continue, Doctor." Dr. Chen nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Your Honor. It's not speculation. I've documented this extensively." She opened her folder and pulled out pages of notes with photographs attached. "Emma uses a combination of hand signals, touches, and body language to communicate with Bailey. For example, 2 taps on his left shoulder means she's feeling anxious. 3 taps on his right shoulder means she's scared. Stroking his ears in a specific pattern means she's sad and needs comfort. A gentle push on his hindquarters means she needs space." The courtroom was mesmerized. Even the court reporter had stopped typing momentarily, caught up in the testimony. "And Bailey responds?" Maria asked. "Immediately and accurately every single time," Dr. Chen confirmed. "But it's even more sophisticated than that. Emma has taught Bailey signals for different people, different situations, different needs. She has a signal that means I need to leave the room. Another that means stay close to me. Another that means I'm okay, you can relax. It's extraordinary. She's essentially created a vocabulary with this dog that she can't or won't use with humans." "Why can't she speak to humans, doctor?" Judge Westbrook asked quietly. Dr. Chen's expression became somber again. "Selective mutism is a complex anxiety disorder, Your Honor. In Emma's case, it's a trauma response. Whatever she witnessed, whatever happened that night in June, was so terrifying, so overwhelming to her young mind that speaking became associated with danger. Some part of Emma's brain believes that if she speaks, something terrible will happen. It's not a choice she's making consciously. It's a protective mechanism that her psyche has locked into place." "Has there been any improvement since Bailey entered her life?" Maria asked. Dr. Chen's face transformed with a genuine smile. "Your Honor, the change has been nothing short of miraculous. Within 1 week of being paired with Bailey, Emma's panic attacks decreased by 60%. Within 2 weeks, she was sleeping through most nights. Within a month, she was eating regular meals again. She returned to school, 2nd grade at Riverside Elementary, with Bailey by her side as her service animal. Her teacher reports that while Emma still doesn't speak, she participates in class using written answers and hand signals, and she's actually ahead of her grade level academically." "That's wonderful," Maria said warmly, "but she still hasn't spoken." "Not to humans," Dr. Chen confirmed. "But here's what's remarkable. I've observed Emma speaking to Bailey. When it's just the two of them, when she thinks no one else is listening, she whispers to him, full sentences. She tells him about her day, her feelings, her fears. Bailey is the only living being Emma trusts enough to speak to." The doctor's voice cracked with emotion. "He's not just her service dog. He's her therapist, her protector, her best friend, and her voice. Bailey is the bridge between Emma's trauma and her healing. Without him, I genuinely believe Emma would have continued to deteriorate. With him, she has a chance at a real life." The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Robert Mitchell had the decency to look uncomfortable, though his jaw was clenched tight. Judge Westbrook studied Emma, who remained hunched over with her face close to Bailey's head. The little girl's lips were moving slightly. Was she whispering to the dog right now? "Dr. Chen," the judge said slowly, "in your professional opinion, what would happen to Emma if she were separated from Bailey?" The therapist didn't hesitate. "It would be catastrophic, Your Honor, potentially life-threatening. Emma would interpret it as another abandonment, another loss, another betrayal. It could undo months of progress in a matter of days." She looked directly at the judge, her expression fierce and protective. "That dog is keeping that little girl alive." David Blackwell rose from his seat with the confidence of a man who had won countless cases in courtrooms just like this one. His expensive suit fit him perfectly, and his silver cufflinks caught the light as he approached Dr. Chen for cross-examination. Everything about him screamed success, power, and authority. "Dr. Chen," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "you paint quite a dramatic picture. But let me ask you something. Have you ever personally witnessed my client, Robert Mitchell, behave inappropriately toward his daughter?" Dr. Chen hesitated. "No, but—" "Yes or no, doctor?" Blackwell interrupted sharply. "No," Dr. Chen admitted reluctantly. "And in fact, you've never even met my client until today, have you?" "That's correct, but Emma's reactions—" "Thank you, doctor, that will be all." Blackwell dismissed her with a wave and turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Robert Mitchell to the stand." Judge Westbrook nodded. "Mr. Mitchell, please come forward." Robert stood gracefully, buttoning his suit jacket as he walked to the witness stand. His movements were measured and confident, like a man who owned every room he entered. As he passed by Emma's table, He glanced down at his daughter with what appeared to be genuine sadness and longing. To the casual observer, he looked like a heartbroken father desperate to reconnect with his child. But Bailey saw something different. The golden retriever's body tensed almost imperceptibly. His ears flattened slightly against his head, and his tail stopped its gentle wagging. Emma's hand, which had been resting loosely on Bailey's head, suddenly clenched into a tight fist, gripping fur so hard her knuckles turned white. Robert took his oath, placed his hand on the Bible, and settled into the witness chair with the ease of a man who had nothing to hide. He looked directly at Judge Westbrook with earnest, honest eyes. "Mr. Mitchell," Blackwell began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter Emma?" Robert's face softened into an expression of such tender love that several people in the gallery felt their hearts tug. "Emma is my world," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment she was born, I've done everything in my power to be a good father. I coached her t-ball team. I read her bedtime stories every night. We had Sunday morning pancake traditions." He paused, seeming to fight back tears. "Losing her has been the most painful experience of my life." "And can you tell us what happened on the night of June 15th, the night your ex-wife claims led to Emma's current condition?" Robert sighed heavily, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture that seemed spontaneous but was likely calculated. "Jennifer and I had an argument. Yes, I'll admit that. We were going through a difficult divorce and tensions were high, but it was just a verbal disagreement. Voices were raised, sure, but nothing more. I never touched Jennifer. I never threatened anyone." He looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I was frustrated. I slammed a cabinet door. Maybe I raised my voice more than I should have, but I never, ever would have done anything to hurt my daughter." "What happened after this argument?" Blackwell prompted. "Jennifer grabbed Emma and left. Just took her in the middle of the night without any warning. The next thing I knew, I was being served with a restraining order and custody papers." Robert's voice took on a hint of righteous indignation. "I've been kept from my daughter for 5 months, Your Honor. 5 months while she's been poisoned against me, told God knows what stories, kept isolated with that dog as her only companion." Judge Westbrook leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting the dog is part of the problem?" Robert chose his words carefully. "Your Honor, I believe Emma has become unhealthily dependent on this animal. She's using it as a crutch to avoid dealing with her real issues that, frankly, I believe her mother has created and exacerbated. Emma needs proper therapy, professional help, and her father's love, not a dog that enables her to hide from the world." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. At her table, Jennifer's face flushed with anger, but her attorney placed a calming hand on her arm. Blackwell walked back toward his table and picked up a folder. "Your Honor, I have documentation here showing that Mr. Mitchell completed a 12-week anger management course. He's attended individual therapy. He's done everything asked of him by the court." He handed the papers to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. "My client has done the work. He's a changed man, if indeed he was ever the man his ex-wife claims him to be." Judge Westbrook reviewed the certificates and therapy completion letters. They looked legitimate, professional, properly signed and dated. Robert Mitchell had done everything by the book. "Mr. Mitchell," the judge said, looking up from the papers, "what do you think should happen with custody?" Robert leaned forward earnestly. "Your Honor, I believe Emma needs both her parents. I'm not asking to take her away from her mother. I just want to be part of my daughter's life again. Joint custody or even just regular unsupervised visitation, whatever the court deems appropriate. But please, don't let Jennifer continue to alienate me from my own child." His voice broke convincingly on the last word. It was a masterful performance. Robert Mitchell presented as the perfect combination of humility, reasonableness, and paternal devotion. Several people in the gallery nodded sympathetically. Even the court reporter looked moved. But Judge Westbrook was not easily fooled. She'd seen too many abusers who could turn on the charm, who could manipulate and deceive with practiced ease. She looked past Robert to where Emma sat, and what she saw troubled her deeply. Emma had hunched even lower in her chair. Her breathing had become rapid and shallow, almost hyperventilating. Both of her small hands were now buried in Bailey's fur, gripping so tightly the dog's skin was pulling. Bailey had shifted his entire body, pressing his 70-pound frame firmly against Emma's legs, his head turning repeatedly between the little girl and her father on the witness stand. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Westbrook said carefully, "I notice that your daughter appears to be in distress while you're testifying. Can you explain why that might be?" Robert turned to look at Emma, and for just a fraction of a second, so brief that most people missed it, his expression changed. The mask of concerned father slipped, and something cold and hard flashed in his eyes, but just as quickly it was gone, replaced by concerned sadness. "Your Honor, it breaks my heart," he said, turning back to the judge. "But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Emma has been coached to fear me. Jennifer has spent 5 months telling her stories, painting me as some kind of monster. Of course she's scared. She's been told to be scared." "I object to that characterization." Maria Rodriguez stood up forcefully. "Mr. Mitchell has no evidence that my client has coached Emma in any way." "Sustained," Judge Westbrook said. "Mr. Mitchell, please refrain from speculating about what your ex-wife has or hasn't told your daughter." "My apologies, Your Honor," Robert said smoothly, never losing his composure. "I'm just a father trying to understand why his daughter won't even look at him." Blackwell jumped back in. "Your Honor, I have multiple character witnesses ready to testify on Mr. Mitchell's behalf. His employer, who will speak to his professionalism and stability. His pastor, who will attest to his moral character. His own mother, who has been devastated by being kept from her granddaughter." He gestured to an elderly woman sitting in the gallery, who dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief on cue. "I'm sure Mr. Mitchell has people who think well of him," Judge Westbrook said dryly. "Most people do. The question is not whether he can be charming and professional with adults who have power. The question is how he behaves with a vulnerable child when he thinks no one is watching." Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, I resent the implication." "It's not an implication, Mr. Mitchell. It's the entire point of this hearing." Judge Westbrook's voice was firm. "You can step down, but don't leave the courtroom. I may have more questions." As Robert stood and walked back to his table, he had to pass directly by Emma again. This time he slowed down, stopping just a few feet from her chair. "Hi, baby girl," he said softly, reaching out as if to touch her shoulder. "Daddy misses you so much." The reaction was immediate and violent. Emma recoiled as if she'd been struck, her chair scraping backward across the floor with a harsh screech. A small, terrified whimper escaped her throat, the first sound she'd made in the courtroom. Bailey exploded into action, standing and positioning himself completely between Emma and Robert, his body rigid and alert. "Mr. Mitchell, step back," Judge Westbrook commanded. Robert held up his hands innocently. "I was just trying to comfort my daughter, Your Honor." "Step back now." Robert complied, but not before Judge Westbrook saw it again. That flash of anger in his eyes, that tight clench of his jaw. The mask had slipped twice now, and she was watching. Jennifer Mitchell approached the witness stand like a woman walking to her own execution. Her hands trembled visibly as she placed one on the Bible to take her oath. Unlike her ex-husband's confident performance, Jennifer looked like she might shatter into 1,000 pieces at any moment. Her auburn hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, showed streaks of premature gray that hadn't been there a year ago. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her simple navy dress hung loosely on her frame. She'd clearly lost weight from stress. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria Rodriguez began gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the court what happened on the night of June 15th. Jennifer's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "It started like so many other nights. Robert came home from work angry. He'd been passed over for a promotion and he'd been drinking." She paused, swallowing hard. I'd learned to recognize the signs, the way his jaw clenched, the way he'd slam his briefcase down, the dangerous quiet in his voice. I tried to keep Emma in her room, to keep her away from him when he got like this. "What happened next?" Maria prompted softly. He started yelling. About his job, about money, about how nothing in his life was going right. I tried to calm him down, but that just made it worse. Jennifer's hands gripped the edges of the witness stand until her knuckles turned white. He said I was worthless, that I was ruining his life, that marrying me was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. I'd heard it all before. But then... Her voice broke completely. Judge Westbrook leaned forward. "Take your time, Mrs. Mitchell." Jennifer took a shuddering breath. Emma came out of her room. She was in her princess nightgown, the purple one with the sparkles that she loved. She'd heard the yelling and she was scared. She just wanted to know if Mommy was okay. Tears streamed down Jennifer's face now, unchecked. She called out "Daddy" in this tiny, scared little voice, and Robert turned on her. "What do you mean, turned on her?" Maria asked. His face changed. It was like watching a monster emerge from behind a mask. He looked at our 7-year-old daughter with pure rage and screamed at her to get back in her room. But Emma was frozen, she couldn't move. So Robert, Jennifer's whole body was shaking now. He grabbed a ceramic vase from the side table and threw it. It shattered against the wall right next to Emma's head. Glass went everywhere. Emma screamed. The courtroom was dead silent, except for Jennifer's ragged breathing and quiet sobs. Even the most hardened attorneys looked disturbed. "Then what happened?" Maria asked, her own voice thick with emotion. Robert started toward Emma. He was still screaming, his fists were clenched, and I saw in his eyes what he was capable of doing. I ran between them, grabbed Emma, and locked us in her bedroom. Robert was pounding on the door, yelling that he was going to teach us both a lesson. Emma was hysterical, shaking and crying, and I was trying to keep quiet so he wouldn't get angrier. Jennifer wiped her eyes with a tissue. I heard him destroying the living room. Furniture crashing, glass breaking, things being thrown. It went on for what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes. Then everything went quiet. "What did you do?" I waited another hour, holding Emma, both of us terrified. When I finally opened the door, Robert had passed out drunk on the couch. The apartment looked like a war zone. And Emma, Jennifer looked at her daughter across the courtroom. Emma hadn't said a word since that moment. Not one word. My baby just disappeared inside herself. "What did you do then?" Maria asked. I packed a bag as quietly as I could. Just grabbed whatever clothes I could find for both of us. I carried Emma out of that apartment at 3 in the morning, drove to a women's shelter, and the next day I filed for an emergency restraining order and divorce papers. Jennifer's voice became stronger, more determined. "I should have left sooner. I should have protected her better. But I swear to God, Your Honor, I will never let him hurt her again." Judge Westbrook studied Jennifer carefully. Unlike Robert's polished performance, Jennifer's testimony had the raw, messy quality of truth. This was a woman who had lived through hell and was still fighting her way out of it. "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said gently, "why didn't you call the police that night?" Jennifer's face flushed with shame. "I was scared. Robert had always told me that if I ever went to the police, he'd make sure I lost Emma. He said he had connections, that no one would believe me, that I'd look like an unstable woman trying to destroy her ex-husband's reputation. And he was so convincing, Your Honor, so charming to everyone else. I was terrified no one would believe me." "And have you sought therapy for yourself?" Judge Westbrook asked. "Yes, Your Honor, I see a counselor twice a week, for PTSD and what they call intimate partner violence trauma. I'm working on it. But my focus has been on Emma, on getting her the help she needs." Now it was David Blackwell's turn for cross-examination. He stood slowly, and there was something predatory in his smile. "Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you and Robert were having serious marital problems before June 15th? "Yes," Jennifer admitted. "We'd been struggling for over a year." "And isn't it true that you threatened to divorce Robert multiple times during that year?" Yes, but..." "Yes or no, please," Blackwell cut her off. "You threatened divorce multiple times, correct?" "Yes." "And isn't it also true that during your divorce proceedings, you sought full custody and requested that Robert have no contact with Emma whatsoever?" "Because he's dangerous." "That's not what I asked. You sought to completely cut Robert out of his daughter's life, didn't you?" Jennifer's voice rose. "To protect her." Blackwell paced in front of the witness stand like a shark circling prey. "Mrs. Mitchell, you claim Robert threw a vase that shattered near Emma's head, yet you have no photos of this damage, do you?" "I left that night. I wasn't thinking about taking pictures." "How convenient. And you claim Robert destroyed your living room, yet you filed no police report documenting this destruction." "I told you why I didn't call the police." "Yes, this vague claim about Robert having connections and making you sound unstable. But isn't the truth, Mrs. Mitchell, that there was no violence that night? That you had a verbal argument and you used it as an excuse to take Emma away from her father?" "No, that's not true." Jennifer was crying openly now, her composure completely shattered. "You've admitted to having marital problems. You've admitted to threatening divorce multiple times. You've admitted that you removed Emma from her home in the middle of the night without allowing her to say goodbye to her father. And now you're here, asking this court to believe your uncorroborated story while keeping a devoted father from his child." "Objection." Maria stood up forcefully. "Counsel is badgering the witness and mischaracterizing her testimony." "Sustained," Judge Westbrook said sharply. "Mr. Blackwell, tone it down." But the damage was done. Blackwell had painted Jennifer as an unstable, vindictive ex-wife who might be using her daughter as a weapon in a bitter divorce. Several people in the gallery were whispering, and Judge Westbrook could see doubt creeping into their faces. "No further questions," Blackwell said dismissively, returning to his seat with a satisfied expression. Jennifer stumbled down from the witness stand, tears streaming down her face. As she passed Emma's table, she looked at her daughter with such desperate love and anguish that it was painful to witness. Emma, still hunched over Bailey, was rocking slightly back and forth, a self-soothing behavior that Dr. Chen had mentioned was a sign of severe distress. Judge Westbrook watched it all, her experienced mind analyzing every detail. She'd heard two very different versions of events, one from a polished, confident man who seemed reasonable and concerned, another from a traumatized woman who was falling apart under pressure. But the judge had learned long ago that the most convincing liars were often the most charismatic, and the most credible truth-tellers were sometimes the ones who looked like they were barely holding it together. Her eyes drifted back to Emma. The child was the key to this entire case, but how could you get the truth from someone who couldn't or wouldn't speak? Judge Margaret Westbrook had presided over difficult cases before, but nothing had prepared her for the helplessness she felt in this moment. She looked down at the small, broken child sitting at the table below her bench, and she knew that every decision she made in the next few minutes could alter the trajectory of this little girl's entire life. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her like a physical force. "We're going to take a 15-minute recess," she announced, needing time to think, to process everything she'd heard. "Everyone remain in the courtroom except the attorneys, who will join me in chambers." In her private office behind the courtroom, Judge Westbrook removed her robe and rubbed her temples. Maria Rodriguez and David Blackwell stood before her desk, along with Emma's court-appointed guardian ad litem, a woman named Patricia Freeman, who had been silent throughout most of the proceedings. "Patricia," the judge said, "you've spent time with Emma over the past few months. What's your assessment?" Patricia, a veteran social worker in her 60s with kind eyes and graying blonde hair, spoke carefully. "Your Honor, I've tried to connect with Emma on 6 different occasions. She won't respond to me any more than she responds to anyone else. But I've observed her with Bailey, and Dr. Chen's testimony aligns with everything I've witnessed. That dog is extraordinary, and Emma's fear." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Emma's fear is real. Whether it's based on actual events or perceived events, I can't say definitively, but that child is genuinely terrified. Of her father, Judge Westbrook pressed. I can't prove it, Your Honor, but my instincts, and I've been doing this for 34 years, tell me yes. David Blackwell scoffed. Your Honor, this is exactly the problem. Everyone is relying on feelings and instincts rather than evidence. My client has demonstrated that he's taken responsibility for his actions, completed all required programs, and is simply asking for a chance to be a father to his daughter. Meanwhile, his ex-wife presents zero evidence. No police reports, no medical records, no photographs, no witnesses to this alleged violence. Because it happened in their home with only Emma as a witness, Maria shot back. And Emma can't speak. How convenient for Mrs. Mitchell's narrative, Blackwell retorted. Enough. Judge Westbrook's voice cut through the argument like a blade. I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to speak directly to Emma one-on-one and see if I can get any response from her that might guide my decision. Your Honor, Blackwell protested, my client has a right to be present. Your client will be in the courtroom where he can see and hear everything through the glass partition of my chambers, but I'm not going to have Emma try to communicate with both parents staring at her. This is my courtroom, counselor, and this is how we're proceeding. 20 minutes later, Emma sat in a comfortable chair in Judge Westbrook's chambers. Bailey was beside her, ever vigilant. The judge had decorated this space deliberately for moments like this. Soft lighting, colorful artwork on the walls, a shelf full of children's books, and a bowl of candy on the desk. Through the glass partition, everyone in the courtroom could observe, but the sound was one way. Emma couldn't hear them. Judge Westbrook pulled her own chair around to sit at Emma's level, not behind the imposing desk but beside her, as if they were just two people having a quiet conversation. She'd removed her judicial robe and was just Margaret now, a grandmother of 3 who had held countless frightened children's hands over the years. Hi, Emma, she said softly. It's just you and me and Bailey in here. Well, and Mr. Whiskers. She gestured to a stuffed cat sitting on the shelf. He's been with me for 20 years listening to kids tell me their stories. He's a very good listener. Emma's eyes flicked briefly toward the stuffed cat, then back to the floor. Her hands remained buried in Bailey's fur. The dog had positioned himself so that Emma could lean against his warm, solid body. Emma, I know you're scared. I know talking is really, really hard right now, but I need to understand what you want, sweetheart, because that's my job to make sure you're safe and happy. Judge Westbrook kept her voice gentle, almost musical. Can you look at me, just for a second? Nothing. Emma's small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her fingers tightened in Bailey's fur. Okay, that's okay. You don't have to look at me. How about this? Can you nod your head if you understand what I'm saying? A long, agonizing pause. Then the tiniest movement. Emma's head dipped forward maybe an inch. It was barely perceptible, but it was something. That's wonderful, Emma. That's so brave. Judge Westbrook felt a flutter of hope. Okay, let me ask you some questions and you can nod for yes or shake your head for no. You don't have to use words. Does that sound okay? Another tiny nod. Great. Are you feeling scared right now? A nod, more emphatic this time. Okay, that's honest and I appreciate that. Are you scared of me? A head shake, no. Good, I'm glad. Are you scared of your mom? Another head shake, more vigorous. Definitely no. Judge Westbrook took a deep breath. This was the crucial question. Emma, sweetheart, are you scared of your dad? Emma's entire body went rigid. Her breathing became rapid, almost panicked. Bailey immediately responded, pressing his full weight against her, his head turning to nuzzle her arm. But Emma didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just froze like a rabbit caught in headlights. It's okay, Judge Westbrook soothed. You don't have to answer that. I can see you're upset. Let's talk about something else. Do you like school? Slowly, Emma relaxed just a fraction, a small nod. Do you like Bailey? A more enthusiastic nod, and Emma's hand stroked the dog's head lovingly. "Does Bailey make you feel safe?" An immediate, emphatic nod. They continued like this for several more minutes. Judge Westbrook asked about Emma's favorite color, purple, whether she liked ice cream, yes, whether she missed her old house, a hesitant, confused gesture that wasn't quite yes or no. Each small response was a victory, a tiny crack in the wall Emma had built around herself. But when Judge Westbrook tried to circle back to questions about her father, "Do you want to see your dad? Do you miss your dad? Would you like to talk to your dad?" Emma shut down completely. No nods, no shakes, just that frozen, terrified stillness. Finally, Judge Westbrook tried a different approach. "Emma, I'm going to make a decision today about where you're going to live and who you're going to spend time with. It's a really important decision. Is there anything at all, that you want to tell me? Any way you want to help me understand what you need?" Emma's lips trembled. For a moment, Judge Westbrook thought the child might actually speak. But then Emma just shook her head slowly and buried her face in Bailey's neck. The judge felt her heart sink. She tried everything she could think of, and she was no closer to the truth than she'd been an hour ago. Yes, Emma was terrified. Yes, she seemed to fear her father, but fear wasn't proof. And without Emma's testimony, without any physical evidence, without witnesses or documentation, how could she justify completely separating a father from his daughter based solely on an ex-wife's accusations and a child's silence? "Okay, sweetheart, thank you for trying. You've been very brave." Judge Westbrook stood, feeling decades older than she had that morning. "Let's go back to the courtroom now." As they walked back through the door, Emma clutching Bailey's harness, Judge Westbrook saw Robert Mitchell leaning back in his chair with a small, satisfied smile on his face. He'd watched the entire exchange through the glass. He'd seen his daughter's inability to communicate. And he knew, just as his attorney knew, that silence and fear weren't enough to keep him from his rights as a father. The legal system required evidence, proof, something concrete. And all they had was a traumatized child, a protective dog, and a mother's desperate pleas. Judge Westbrook took her seat on the bench, the weight of her robe feeling heavier than ever before. She looked at the people gathered in her courtroom, the attorneys, the social workers, the observers. She looked at Jennifer Mitchell's tear-stained, hopeful face. She looked at Robert Mitchell's confident, patient expression. And then she looked at Emma, small and fragile at her table, with only Bailey standing between her and a world that had hurt her too deeply for words to express. "I'm ready to make my ruling," Judge Westbrook said, her voice heavy with the burden of her office. But she wasn't ready. Not really. Because how could anyone be ready to make a decision when the truth remained locked inside a silent child's heart? Judge Margaret Westbrook's hand hovered over her gavel, her mind racing through years of legal precedent, case law, and her own moral compass. The courtroom was so silent that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like thunder. Every eye was fixed on her, waiting for words that would change lives forever. "In cases like these," she began slowly, "the court must balance many factors: the rights of parents, the welfare of the child, the evidence presented, and the law itself." She paused, looking down at her notes, at the certificates showing Robert Mitchell's completion of anger management, at Dr. Chen's reports about Emma's trauma, at the complete absence of any police reports or documented evidence of violence. David Blackwell leaned forward slightly, confidence radiating from every pore. He could sense which way this was going. Without concrete evidence, without Emma's testimony, the law would favor his client's parental rights. Maria Rodriguez gripped her pen so tightly it looked like it might snap. Jennifer Mitchell's face had gone pale, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. "The court recognizes that Emma has experienced significant trauma," Judge Westbrook continued. "Dr. Chen's testimony about the severity of her condition is compelling and deeply concerning. However," that single word, however, landed like a bomb. Jennifer let out a small, choked sound. Robert's smile grew wider. "However," the judge repeated, her voice heavy with regret, The court must also recognize that Mr. Mitchell has fulfilled every requirement asked of him. He has completed anger management. He has attended therapy. He has maintained steady employment and a stable home environment. And while Mrs. Mitchell's testimony was emotional and clearly sincere, there is no corroborating evidence. Emma's breathing had become rapid, almost hyperventilating. At her table, she was rocking back and forth, the way children do when they're trying to self-soothe against overwhelming panic. Bailey had stood up, pressing his entire body weight against her legs, trying to ground her, but it wasn't working. The little girl's eyes were wide with terror, darting between the judge and her father. She understood. Even at 7 years old, even through her trauma, Emma understood what was about to happen. The nice judge was going to make her see him. The monster who had destroyed her world was going to be allowed back into her life. And there was nothing she could do about it because she couldn't speak, couldn't tell them, couldn't make them understand. Therefore, Judge Westbrook said, and the word felt like a death sentence, it is the ruling of this court that. Emma's small hand moved. It was such a quick, subtle movement that most people in the courtroom missed it entirely. Her trembling right hand dropped from where it had been clutching her stuffed rabbit and moved to Bailey's shoulder. Her fingers, shaking violently, made contact with the golden fur. Taboo, taboo, taboo. 3 deliberate touches, each one pressed firmly into Bailey's right shoulder blade, exactly where Dr. Chen had described during her testimony about Emma's communication system. 3 taps on the right shoulder meant scared, not just anxious, but genuinely frightened. But Emma wasn't finished. Her tiny hand moved again and her index finger extended, pointing across the courtroom. The gesture was small, barely noticeable, lasting less than 2 seconds, but the direction was unmistakable. She was pointing directly at her father's table, directly at Robert Mitchell. Bailey's response was immediate and dramatic. The golden retriever, who had been the picture of calm professionalism throughout the entire hearing, transformed in an instant. He stood at full height, his body going rigid with tension. Every muscle in his 70-pound frame tensed. His ears, which had been relaxed, flattened back against his head. His tail, which had been gently wagging, went completely still. And then Bailey did something that made several people in the courtroom gasp. He moved. The dog positioned himself directly between Emma and her father's side of the courtroom, his body forming a physical barrier. It was a protective stance, deliberate and unmistakable. Bailey's head lowered slightly, his gaze fixed on Robert Mitchell with an intensity that was almost human in its focus. The dog sat in a position that service dog trainers call an alert posture, a specific stance that indicated he had identified a threat to his handler. A low sound came from Bailey's chest, not quite a growl, he was too well trained for that, but a rumbling vocalization that conveyed a clear message: stay away from her. The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs. People shifted in their seats, trying to understand what was happening. The court reporter stopped typing, her fingers frozen over the keys. Maria Rodriguez stood halfway up from her chair, her mouth open in surprise. David Blackwell's face had gone red with indignation. But 3 people in that courtroom saw it clearly, understood exactly what had just happened. Dr. Sarah Chen was on her feet, her hand covering her mouth, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and validation. She'd witnessed Emma use these exact signals in therapy. She knew what they meant. Jennifer Mitchell was crying, but these were different tears now, tears of desperate hope. Her daughter had finally communicated. Emma had found a way to speak without words. And Judge Margaret Westbrook, whose experienced eyes missed nothing, had seen the entire sequence. She'd been looking at Emma at the exact moment the child had given the signal. She'd seen the 3 taps. She'd seen the pointing finger. She'd seen Bailey's immediate, trained response. The judge's hand, which had been raised to strike the gavel and finalize her ruling, stopped in midair. "Stop," Judge Westbrook said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Everyone stopped talking, Right now. The courtroom fell silent instantly, the authority in her voice brooking no argument. Nobody move, the judge continued, her eyes fixed on Emma and Bailey. Dr. Chen, stand up, please. Dr. Chen rose, her legs visibly shaking. What, Judge Westbrook said slowly, deliberately, just happened. Dr. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the courtroom, everyone heard her clearly. Emma gave Bailey the danger signal, Your Honor. 3 taps on his right shoulder means she's scared, genuinely frightened, not just anxious, and she indicated the source of her fear. The therapist pointed at Robert Mitchell. Him. She pointed at her father. That's ridiculous, David Blackwell exploded from his seat. Your Honor, you cannot seriously be considering. Sit down. Judge Westbrook's voice was steel. Dr. Chen, you testified earlier about Emma's communication system with Bailey. Explain to me again in detail what that signal means and how Bailey is trained to respond. As Dr. Chen began explaining, Judge Westbrook watched Bailey. The dog hadn't moved from his protective position. His entire focus remained on Robert Mitchell, his body language screaming what Emma's voice could not. This man is dangerous. This man is a threat. Stay away from my girl. And Emma, small, broken, silent Emma, had her face buried in her hands, her entire body shaking with silent sobs. She had tried. She had done the only thing she could do. She had told them the truth in the only language she had left. The question was, would anyone listen? Robert Mitchell's face had gone from confident to furious, a vein pulsing in his temple. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and everyone in that courtroom saw the rage boiling beneath his polished exterior. Judge Westbrook saw it too, and suddenly everything clicked into place. I'm calling a recess, she announced. 30 minutes. Dr. Chen, I need you in my chambers, immediately. And someone get animal behavior experts on the phone. I want to understand exactly what I just witnessed. She stood, but before leaving the bench, she pointed directly at Robert Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, you stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't approach your daughter. Don't do anything except sit in that chair. Are we clear? Robert's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists on the table. Your Honor, this is. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor, he ground out through clenched teeth. As Judge Westbrook swept from the courtroom, one thought echoed through her mind. That child just spoke. Not with words, but she spoke. And I'll be damned if I don't listen. Judge Westbrook's chambers had never felt so crowded. Dr. Sarah Chen sat on one side of the desk, her therapy notes spread out before her. On speakerphone was Dr. Marcus Reynolds, a renowned expert in service dog training and animal behavior from the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary School. Maria Rodriguez stood by the window, while Patricia Freeman, the guardian ad litem, leaned against the bookshelf. David Blackwell had demanded to be present, and he sat with his arms crossed, radiating skepticism and barely contained fury. Dr. Reynolds, Judge Westbrook said into the phone, I need you to explain to me, in terms that will hold up in a court of law, what I just witnessed. The voice that came through the speaker was calm, authoritative, and measured. Your Honor, I've reviewed the video footage your clerk just sent me of the incident in question. I've also been briefed on this particular service dog's training background. What you witnessed was a textbook example of a psychiatric service dog responding to handler-initiated threat alerts. In plain English, Doctor, Judge Westbrook pressed. The child gave her dog a specific signal, 3 taps on the shoulder, indicating she was experiencing fear. She then directed the dog's attention to the source of that fear by pointing. The dog responded exactly as trained, by positioning himself as a physical barrier and assuming an alert posture. This is not random behavior, Your Honor. This is the result of hundreds of hours of specialized training. Blackwell scoffed loudly. So a dog moves and we're supposed to overturn parental rights. This is absurd. Dr. Reynolds continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. What makes this particularly significant is the dog's sustained focus on the individual in question. Service dogs at Bailey's level of training don't respond to false signals or perceived threats. They're trained to distinguish between actual danger and normal stress. The fact that Bailey maintained his protective position, kept his focus on Mr. Mitchell, and displayed clear warning behaviors indicates he's responding to genuine distress signals from his handler. Dr. Chen jumped in, her voice urgent. "Your Honor, I need to tell you something else, something I've documented but haven't had a chance to present in court." She pulled out a folder with photographs. "During our therapy sessions, I've been conducting something called visual response therapy with Emma. I show her various photographs and monitor both her physical reactions and Bailey's responses." "What kind of photographs?" Judge Westbrook asked. "Pictures of different people, family members, teachers, strangers from magazines, and yes, both of her parents." Dr. Chen spread the photos across the desk. "Emma's response to most photographs is neutral or positive. Her mother's photo gets a positive response, relaxation, a small smile. Her grandmother's photo, same thing. Her second-grade teacher, positive. Random strangers, neutral." "And her father's photo?" the judge asked, though she already knew the answer. "Immediate panic response. Every single time. Elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, trembling, and..." Dr. Chen pulled out her phone and showed them a video. "Bailey gives the exact same alert behavior you just saw in the courtroom. I have this documented across 8 different sessions, Your Honor. 8 times I showed Emma her father's photograph, and 8 times she gave Bailey the danger signal." The room fell silent except for the sound of Blackwell's pen tapping furiously against his legal pad. His face had gone from red to purple. Judge Westbrook leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what does this mean?" "It means Emma's fear of her father is consistent, documented, and genuine. It's not coached. It's not manipulated. It's a trauma response that she can't control and can't fake. Children with selective mutism don't have the cognitive sophistication to maintain a deception like this across months of therapy. Her response is involuntary. It's her nervous system reacting to a perceived threat." "Perceived being the operative word," Blackwell interjected sharply. "This proves nothing except that a disturbed child has an irrational fear, possibly implanted by her mother." "Actually," Dr. Reynolds's voice came through the speaker again, "there's more. Your Honor, service dogs like Bailey are also trained in what we call threat assessment. They can detect physiological changes in humans, elevated cortisol levels, aggressive body language, changes in voice tone and breathing patterns. Bailey isn't just responding to Emma's signals. He's also directly assessing Mr. Mitchell's behavior and physiological state." Judge Westbrook sat up straighter. "Are you saying the dog can detect something about Mr. Mitchell that we can't?" "Dogs have senses far beyond human capability. They can smell hormonal changes associated with aggression. They can detect microexpressions and body language cues that humans miss. If Bailey is consistently alerting to Mr. Mitchell as a threat, it's worth considering that the dog is picking up on behavioral patterns that align with Emma's fear. Patterns that Mr. Mitchell may be very good at hiding from humans, but can't hide from a highly trained animal." "This is pseudoscience," Blackwell exploded. "Your Honor, you cannot make a custody determination based on what a dog supposedly smells or senses. This is a travesty of justice." Judge Westbrook held up her hand for silence. "I'm not finished. Dr. Chen, you said you have something else." Dr. Chen nodded, pulling out another document. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been consulting with Emma's pediatrician about her physical symptoms. She has documented injuries consistent with chronic stress and anxiety, stress-induced stomach ulcers, hair loss from anxiety-related pulling, bite marks on the inside of her cheeks from clenching her jaw. These are real, physical manifestations of trauma. Children don't develop ulcers from nothing. Could be caused by the divorce, by being separated from her father," Blackwell argued, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "That's possible," Dr. Chen admitted. "Except for one thing. According to her medical records, Emma's symptoms began months before the separation, while she was still living with both parents. Her pediatrician documented unexplained bruising, anxiety symptoms, and concerning behavioral changes dating back over a year. Changes that Jennifer Mitchell reported but that were dismissed as typical childhood issues at the time." Judge Westbrook felt her blood run cold. "You're saying there's medical documentation of problems while the family was still intact?" "Yes, Your Honor. It's all in her medical file. I've subpoenaed the complete records, and they paint a picture of a child who was experiencing severe stress in her home environment long before the night of June 15th. The judge turned to Patricia Freeman. "Patricia, you've been quiet. What's your assessment?" The guardian ad litem spoke carefully, her 34 years of experience evident in every word. "Your Honor, I've learned to trust my instincts, and I've learned to pay attention to what children tell us, even when they can't use words. Emma has been trying to communicate for months. She's been screaming silently, and we haven't been listening because we've been waiting for verbal testimony. But testimony comes in many forms." Judge Westbrook stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where normal life continued, unaware of the life-changing decision being made in this room. She thought about her own granddaughters, about what she would want for them if they were in Emma's position. "Here's what we're going to do," she said finally, turning back to face the room. "We're going back into that courtroom, and I'm going to conduct what might be an unusual test, but one that I believe is necessary for justice." "What kind of test?" Blackwell demanded. Judge Westbrook's eyes were hard as steel. "I'm going to ask Mr. Mitchell to approach his daughter while Bailey is present. I want to observe the interaction with my own eyes, with Dr. Chen and Dr. Reynolds providing real-time analysis of what we're seeing." "Your Honor, this is my courtroom, counselor, and this is how we're proceeding. Your client claims to be a loving father who just wants to reconnect with his daughter. If that's true, then this should be a simple, beautiful moment of a father greeting his child. But if it's not true," she let the sentence hang in the air, "then we'll all see what that looks like." Blackwell stood up, his face twisted with anger. "I strongly object to this circus." "Objection noted and overruled. Let's go." As they filed back into the courtroom, Judge Westbrook felt a certainty settling into her bones. She'd spent 20 years learning to read people, to see past their masks, to find the truth hiding beneath polished exteriors and rehearsed testimony. It was time to see what Robert Mitchell looked like when he couldn't hide anymore. The courtroom felt different when everyone returned. The air was electric with tension, charged with the understanding that something unprecedented was about to happen. Emma sat at her table, Bailey pressed against her legs, both of them trembling. Jennifer clutched Maria Rodriguez's hand, her knuckles white. Robert Mitchell sat rigidly in his chair, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched beneath his eye. Judge Westbrook took her seat, and the authority in her voice could have cut glass. "We're going to conduct a simple test. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to ask you to approach your daughter. Just walk up to her table and attempt to greet her as any father would greet his child. Nothing more." "Your Honor, I must object strenuously," Blackwell began. "Your objection is noted and overruled. Mr. Mitchell, please stand." Robert stood slowly, smoothing his expensive suit jacket. His face was a mask of wounded patience, the expression of a reasonable man being subjected to unreasonable scrutiny. "Your Honor, I don't understand why this is necessary. Emma is clearly traumatized, and forcing this interaction seems cruel." "Mr. Mitchell, I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked you to approach your daughter." For just a fraction of a second, something dark and ugly flashed across Robert's face, but he recovered quickly, replacing it with a sad, gentle expression. He took a step toward Emma's table. Bailey's reaction was instantaneous. The golden retriever stood at full alert, his body rigid as stone. His ears flattened completely against his head. A low, sustained rumble emanated from his chest, not quite a growl, but a clear warning. The dog positioned himself directly between Emma and her approaching father, his stance unwavering. Emma's hands flew to Bailey's shoulders. Tap, 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 over and over, frantic, desperate. Her breathing became ragged, panicked. Small whimpering sounds escaped her throat, the most sound anyone had heard from her in months. "Keep going, Mr. Mitchell," Judge Westbrook said, her eyes missing nothing. Robert took another step, his hands spread in a placating gesture. "Emma, baby, it's Daddy. I just want to say hello. I miss you so much, sweetheart." His voice was syrupy sweet, but there was something underneath it, something that didn't match the words. Bailey's response escalated. The dog's hackles rose along his spine, making him look larger, more formidable. His body tensed like a coiled spring, every muscle ready to act. His focus on Robert was absolute, unwavering, the kind of focus that prey animals recognize instinctively as predatory intent, except Bailey wasn't the predator here. He was the guardian standing between predator and prey. Dr. Chen spoke from her seat, her voice clinical but urgent. "Your Honor, Bailey's exhibiting what we call Level 4 protective behavior. This is extremely rare. In 2 years of training, most service dogs never reach this level of alert. It only occurs when they detect imminent danger to their handler." "This is ridiculous." Robert's voice rose, his composure starting to crack. "I'm being judged by a dog. This is my daughter." "One more step, Mr. Mitchell," Judge Westbrook commanded. Robert's face was reddening now, the mask slipping further. He took another step forward, and now he was less than 6 feet from Emma, close enough that his cologne, sharp and overwhelming, reached her nostrils. Emma recoiled as if she'd been struck, pressing herself backward into her chair so hard it scraped against the floor. And then Emma did something that stopped everyone's heart. Her small hand released Bailey's fur and moved to her own neck, pointing at red marks that had faded to almost nothing, but were still barely visible if you looked closely. Fingerprint-shaped marks that Jennifer had photographed months ago, but that Robert's lawyers had dismissed as normal childhood bruises. "No," Emma whispered, the first word she'd spoken in court, so quiet it was almost inaudible. "No, no, 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 no. Emma, stop this nonsense right now." Robert's voice cracked like a whip, and there it was, the real Robert Mitchell. His face contorted with rage, all pretense of the loving father evaporating in an instant. "You're embarrassing me. Your mother put you up to this, didn't she? Didn't she?" The transformation was stunning in its completeness. The charming, polished businessman was gone, replaced by a man with blazing eyes, clenched fists, and a voice that made everyone in the courtroom flinch. Bailey erupted into action. The golden retriever lunged forward, not to attack, but to create distance. He pushed Emma's chair backward with his body weight while simultaneously planting himself as an immovable barrier. His lips pulled back slightly, showing teeth for the first time, and the sound he made was no longer ambiguous. It was a warning growl that said clearly, "Come one step closer and find out what happens." "Mr. Mitchell, stop." Judge Westbrook's voice thundered through the courtroom. "Do not take another step." But Robert was beyond hearing. 6 months of maintaining his facade, 6 months of playing the victim, 6 months of careful control, all of it shattered in an instant. He slammed his fist on Emma's table, making everyone jump. "This is absurd. I've jumped through every hoop, completed every program, played by every rule, and I'm being judged by a damn dog and a child who won't even speak." "Bailiff," Judge Westbrook commanded, and 2 court officers moved toward Robert. "Get your hands off me." Robert shook them off violently, his fury now directed at the judge. "You're going to take my daughter away because of what? Because she's scared? Because a dog doesn't like me? Where's the evidence? Where's the proof? You can't do this." "Mr. Mitchell, you are dangerously close to contempt of court." "Contempt?" Robert's laugh was ugly bitter. "You want to see contempt? I'll show you contempt, that ungrateful little." He didn't get to finish. His own attorney grabbed his arm, hissing, shut up right now." But it was too late. Every word, every gesture, every flash of rage had been witnessed by the entire courtroom. Jennifer was sobbing openly, her hand over her mouth. "That's him," she cried. "That's who he really is. That's what Emma saw." Judge Westbrook's gavel came down like thunder. "Order! Mr. Mitchell, sit down immediately, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Robert stood there, breathing hard, his face purple with rage. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he seemed to realize what he'd done. He tried to put the mask back on, tried to smooth his expression into something reasonable, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. The truth was out. He sat down slowly, his hands shaking. Whether from rage or fear was impossible to tell. Judge Westbrook took a long breath, then spoke with absolute authority. "I've seen enough. I'm ready to rule." The courtroom held its collective breath. "It is the order of this court that Jennifer Mitchell is granted sole legal and physical custody of Emma Rose Mitchell, effective immediately." The judge's voice was steel. "Robert Mitchell is granted supervised visitation only, to take place at a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present, for 2 hours every other week. This visitation is conditional upon Mr. Mitchell completing a minimum of 1 year of intensive therapy, including anger management and parenting classes." "Your Honor," Blackwell tried to interrupt. "I'm not finished. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell is ordered to have no contact with Emma outside of these supervised visits. No phone calls, no letters, no attempts to communicate through third parties. Emma's psychiatric service dog, Bailey, will remain with her at all times, including during any supervised visitations. If Mr. Mitchell fails to comply with any of these conditions, or if he displays any aggressive behavior during supervised visits, this court will consider terminating his parental rights entirely." Robert sat frozen, his face ashen. "This court finds that Emma Mitchell has communicated clearly, not with words, but through every other means available to her, that she fears her father. Her fear is consistent, documented, and supported by medical evidence, therapeutic observations, and the behavior of a highly trained service animal. This court further finds that Mr. Mitchell's behavior today confirms that Emma's fear is not irrational or coached, but based on genuine experience of his temper and inability to control his anger." Judge Westbrook looked directly at Robert, her expression hard. "Mr. Mitchell, you had every opportunity today to prove you were the father you claimed to be. Instead, you proved exactly the opposite. You showed us all who you really are when you can't maintain control. And that man, the one we just saw, is not safe to be around a traumatized 7-year-old child." She turned to Emma and her voice softened. "Emma, sweetheart, you were so brave today. You told us the truth and we listened. You're going to be safe now." Emma, still pressed against Bailey, looked up at the judge for the first time. Tears streamed down her small face, but there was something else there too, a tiny flicker of relief, of hope. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with finality. Jennifer ran to Emma, dropping to her knees and gathering her daughter into her arms. Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder while Bailey pressed against both of them, his tail finally wagging again, a gentle, relieved wag that said she's safe. "We did it. She's safe." As the courtroom emptied, as Robert Mitchell stormed out with his attorney scrambling behind him, as reporters rushed to their phones to file stories about the unprecedented case, Dr. Chen approached the judge's bench. "Your Honor, thank you. Thank you for listening to what Emma couldn't say." Judge Westbrook removed her glasses and wiped her eyes, not caring who saw. "That dog gave voice to a voiceless child. That's what justice is supposed to look like." 6 months later, Emma Mitchell sat in Dr. Chen's office, Bailey as always by her side. The little girl looked different now. Her face had filled out, the dark circles under her eyes had faded, and there was a light in her expression that had been absent for so long. "Emma," Dr. Chen said gently, Would you like to tell me about your week?" Emma was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on Bailey's head. Then, in a small but clear voice, she said, "We went to the park, Bailey and me. We played fetch." Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. Emma's voice had come back, slowly, gradually, but it was coming back. She still only spoke in safe spaces, still only to people she trusted completely, but every word was a victory. "That sounds wonderful," Dr. Chen said. "How did it feel?" Emma thought about this carefully. Bailey says I'm going to be okay." "And what do you think?" Emma looked down at her golden-furred guardian, at the dog who had been her voice when she had none, her protector when she was defenseless, her bridge back to the world. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "I think Bailey's right." The story of the little girl and her service dog spread across Pennsylvania and then nationwide. It changed how courts viewed trauma, how they evaluated evidence, how they listened to children who couldn't speak. It led to legislation allowing service animals in family court proceedings across the state. It trained judges to recognize that testimony comes in many forms. But for Emma Mitchell, it meant something simpler and more profound. It meant she was safe. It meant someone had listened. It meant that even in silence, even without words, the truth could still be heard. And sometimes, that truth is spoken by a golden retriever who understood what words could not express. That some fears are real, some dangers are genuine, and some love is so fierce it refuses to let darkness win. Bailey remained by Emma's side as she healed, as she found her voice again, as she learned to trust the world once more. He was there for her first full sentence, her first day back at school without anxiety, her first nightmare-free week. And years later, when Emma was asked to speak at a fundraiser for traumatized children, she stood on stage, a confident teenager now, with Bailey, gray-muzzled but still devoted, sitting beside her. "My dog saved my life," she told the crowd. "Not just because he was trained to, but because he listened when no one else could hear me screaming, because he believed me when I had no words left to speak, because he loved me when I couldn't love myself." She looked down at Bailey, and the old dog's tail thumped against the floor. "He taught me that being silent doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It just means you need someone who knows how to listen." The end.